Imagine you're walking through the hills of southern Africa. The air is quiet. The wind moves gently through the trees. Then, without warning, you come across something extraordinary. Towering stone walls. Some reaching more than 30 feet into the sky. Built without cement. Without steel. Without modern machines. Just millions of carefully placed stones. You might stop and ask yourself, who could have built this? And how? Welcome to Great Zimbabwe, the greatest ancient stone city in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, these remarkable ruins stand in the country of Zimbabwe, a nation that takes its very name from this place. But hundreds of years ago, this was no ruin. It was a thriving city. A place where kings ruled. Merchants traded. Craftsmen shaped stone and metal with incredible skill. Children played in the shadows of the great walls. And families built lives together in one of Africa's most successful kingdoms. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe was a center of wealth and power. Gold from its lands reached distant markets. Traders traveled here from across the Indian Ocean. Its rulers governed a kingdom whose influence stretched far beyond these hills. Yet when outsiders first saw these ruins centuries later, many refused to believe Africans had built them. Instead of trusting the evidence before them, they searched for foreign builders, foreign kings, foreign civilizations. But archaeology tells a different story. The people who built Great Zimbabwe did not come from somewhere else. They came from here. Their knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Their hands shaped the granite. Their vision transformed the rocky hillside into one of the greatest cities of medieval Africa. This is not a story about a mystery that can never be solved. It is the story of a civilization whose achievements were overlooked for far too long. Welcome to the African Archive, where we bring Africa's history to life through careful research and powerful storytelling. If you enjoy discovering the people, kingdoms, civilizations, and mysteries that shaped our world, subscribe and join us as we uncover the stories history should never forget. In this documentary, we'll walk through the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe. We'll discover how a city rose from the hills. How it became rich through trade. How its people built without mortar. And how its legacy gave a modern nation its name. Because sometimes, the greatest wonder is not that a civilization existed. The greatest wonder is that the world almost forgot what it achieved. This is the story of Great Zimbabwe. Chapter 1. A city in the hills. Every great civilization begins with a place. For Great Zimbabwe, it began among the rolling hills of southern Africa. Today, this ancient city stands near the modern town of Masvingo, in southeastern Zimbabwe. Every year, visitors come from around the world to walk among its towering stone walls and wonder how they were built. But long before these ruins became a World Heritage Site, they were part of a living city. A city filled with voices. With families. With farmers. With traders. With craftsmen. And with leaders who dreamed of building something that would last. The land around Great Zimbabwe was rich and generous. There were rivers that provided water. Open grasslands where cattle could graze. Forests that supplied wood. And nearby hills with granite, the very stone that would shape the city. This was a place where people could build a future. The ancestors of the Shona people settled here many centuries ago. They farmed the land. They grew crops such as sorghum and millet. They raised cattle, which were more than just animals. Cattle were a sign of wealth. A measure of success. A source of food. And an important part of community life. As families grew, so did their villages. People worked together. They shared knowledge. They learned which stones were strongest. Which fields were most fertile. And how to make the best use of the land around them. Generation after generation, those small communities became larger. Leaders emerged. Trade increased. New homes were built. Then something remarkable began to happen. Instead of building with mud or wood alone, skilled builders started working with granite taken from the nearby hills. They carefully split the stone into flat blocks. Then, without using mortar, they stacked each stone with extraordinary precision. One stone. Then another. Then another. Slowly, walls began to rise. Not because one king ordered them built overnight, but because thousands of people, over many generations, added their skill and labor to a shared vision. Those walls became more than buildings. They became a symbol. A symbol of unity, of stability, and of a kingdom that believed its future would be as strong as the stone beneath its feet. As the city grew, so did its reputation. Travelers began to hear of a wealthy kingdom in the hills. A place where cattle were plentiful, where skilled craftsmen produced beautiful goods, and where valuable gold could be found. Soon, merchants from distant lands would make the journey to Great Zimbabwe. They would bring more than goods. They would bring new opportunities. And they would help turn a growing city into one of the richest kingdoms in Africa. In the next chapter, we discover how gold, trade, and ambition transformed Great Zimbabwe into a thriving center of wealth whose influence reached far beyond the African continent. Chapter 2. The Kingdom of Gold. A city cannot become great on stone alone. It also needs opportunity. For Great Zimbabwe, that opportunity was gold. Beneath the soil of southern Africa lay one of the world's most valuable resources. For centuries, people mined gold from the region. Skilled craftsmen shaped it into small bars and ornaments. Merchants carried it across great distances. And rulers used its wealth to strengthen their kingdom. But gold was only part of the story. The people of Great Zimbabwe also raised large herds of cattle. They hunted elephants for ivory. They produced iron tools. And they made beautiful pottery and woven goods. These products were in demand far beyond their homeland. Soon, Great Zimbabwe became the center of a growing trade network. Merchants traveled from the eastern coast of Africa to buy its valuable goods. From the ports of the Swahili coast, ships crossed the Indian Ocean. Some sailed to Arabia. Others reached Persia, India, and even China. Archaeologists have found Chinese porcelain, Persian glass, and other imported objects among the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. These discoveries tell an important story. The people of Great Zimbabwe were not isolated from the rest of the world. They were active participants in a global trading network that connected Africa with distant civilizations. Trade brought more than wealth. It brought ideas, new goods, new skills, and new opportunities. As the kingdom prospered, its rulers became more powerful. They collected tribute, settled disputes, protected trade routes, and helped maintain order across their lands. The city itself continued to grow. More homes were built. Markets became busier. Craftsmen worked with stone, iron, gold, and clay. Farmers produced food for a growing population. Herdsmen cared for thousands of cattle grazing across the surrounding grasslands. Life in Great Zimbabwe depended on many different people. Not only kings, not only merchants, but ordinary men and women whose daily work kept the kingdom alive. Builders shaped stone. Blacksmiths forged tools. Potters fired clay. Mothers and fathers raised families. Children learned the skills they would one day pass to their own sons and daughters. Generation after generation, the city flourished. Its wealth became known across southern Africa. Its influence spread far beyond its stone walls. But success created a new challenge. A kingdom that had grown rich now wanted to build something worthy of its greatness. Not just homes. Not just markets. But monuments that would stand for centuries. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the people of Great Zimbabwe built one of the world's most remarkable stone cities. Without cement, without steel, and without modern machines. A masterpiece that still amazes visitors today. Chapter 3. The city built without mortar. By the time Great Zimbabwe reached the height of its power, it had become one of the most impressive cities in Africa. Travelers approaching the city would have seen something unlike anything else in the region. Massive stone walls, towering gateways, curving passages, and buildings that seemed to rise naturally from the rocky hills. Even today, people often ask the same question. How were these walls built? The answer is both simple and extraordinary. The builders used the granite found in the hills around them. They heated the rock with fire, then cooled it quickly, causing it to crack into large pieces. From there, skilled craftsmen shaped the stone into blocks. One by one, they carefully placed each stone on top of another. No cement, no mortar, just skill, patience, and remarkable engineering. Every stone had to fit securely. Every wall had to support its own weight. The result was a city that has stood for more than 7 centuries. At the heart of Great Zimbabwe stood 3 major areas. The first was the hill complex. Built on a rocky hill overlooking the land below, it is the oldest part of the city. Many historians believe it was the home of early rulers and an important place for religious ceremonies. From the top of the hill, leaders could look across the surrounding countryside. It was a place of both authority and tradition. The second was the Great Enclosure. This is the most famous part of Great Zimbabwe. Its outer wall stretches for hundreds of meters and rises as high as 11 meters, or about 36 feet, in some places. Inside the enclosure stands one of the city's greatest mysteries: the conical tower. Unlike a watchtower, it has no doors, no windows, no stairs. People could not live inside it. Most archaeologists believe it was a symbol rather than a building for everyday use. Perhaps it represented the king's authority. Perhaps it stood for prosperity or a successful harvest. Its true meaning has been lost with time. But its presence reminds us that every civilization has symbols that express its values and beliefs. Beyond these monuments lay the valley complex. Here, many ordinary people lived and worked. Families built homes from clay and timber. Markets buzzed with activity. Craftsmen shaped iron, pottery, and jewelry. Children played in open spaces while traders arrived with goods from distant places. This was not simply a city of kings. It was a city of people. One of Great Zimbabwe's most treasured discoveries is a group of carved soapstone birds, now known as the Zimbabwe Birds. Perched on tall stone columns, these graceful sculptures may have represented royal authority or spiritual guardians. Today, they are the national symbol of Zimbabwe, appearing on the country's flag, coat of arms, and other national emblems. As the years passed, the city continued to grow. Its walls became a symbol of strength. Its buildings reflected the skill of its people. And its name became known across the region. Great Zimbabwe was more than a place built from stone. It was built from cooperation. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. And the determination of thousands of ordinary people working towards something greater than themselves. In the next chapter, we'll step beyond the walls and discover what everyday life was really like in this remarkable city. And how its people built a thriving society that lasted for centuries. Chapter 4. Life behind the stone walls. Stone walls can tell us how a city was built. But they cannot tell us everything. To understand Great Zimbabwe, we have to imagine the people who called it home. Every morning, the city came alive. Farmers walked to their fields before the sun grew hot. Herdsmen led cattle across the open grasslands. Blacksmiths lit their furnaces. Potters shaped clay into bowls and jars. Weavers turned plant fibers into baskets and cloth. Merchants arranged their goods, hoping to welcome traders from near and far. Life in Great Zimbabwe was busy. And every person had a role to play. At the center of the kingdom was the king. He was more than a ruler. He was a symbol of unity. He settled disputes, protected trade routes, oversaw important ceremonies, and worked with trusted advisors to govern the kingdom. His authority helped keep peace across a growing and prosperous land. But a kingdom could not succeed through one person alone. Its strength came from its people. Farmers grew sorghum, millet, and other crops that fed the community. cattle herders cared for the kingdom's most valuable animals. In Great Zimbabwe, cattle were more than a source of food. They represented wealth, status, and security. A large herd was a sign that a family or a leader had prospered. Religion also shaped everyday life. The people believed that the world of the living was closely connected to the world of their ancestors. Important ceremonies brought communities together to honor those who had come before them and to seek guidance for the future. Some historians believe the rulers of Great Zimbabwe also held important spiritual responsibilities, helping unite the kingdom through shared beliefs as well as political leadership. Art was another important part of life. Skilled craftsmen carved beautiful objects from soapstone. Among their finest creations were the Zimbabwe birds. Though we may never know exactly what these birds meant, they remind us that every civilization leaves behind symbols that speak across generations. Children learned by watching their parents and elders. A young farmer learned how to care for the land. A young builder learned how to shape stone. A young trader learned how to judge the value of goods. Knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Not through books, but through daily life. For more than 3 centuries, Great Zimbabwe remained a place of stability, trade, and achievement. Its people had built one of Africa's greatest cities. Its walls stood strong. Its markets were filled with activity. Its kingdom was respected across the region. But even the strongest walls cannot stop the passage of time. Slowly, the world around Great Zimbabwe began to change. Trade routes shifted. Resources became harder to manage. New kingdoms were rising. And the great stone city would soon face challenges it could not overcome. In the next chapter, we discover why one of Africa's greatest cities gradually fell silent, and how its remarkable story almost disappeared from history. Chapter 5. The city falls silent. For more than 300 years, Great Zimbabwe stood as a symbol of power. Its stone walls watched over a busy city. Its markets welcomed traders from distant lands. Its rulers governed a kingdom built on skill, hard work, and opportunity. But no city remains at its peak forever. As the years passed, the world around Great Zimbabwe began to change. The population continued to grow. More people needed food. More cattle needed grazing land. The forests provided wood for cooking and building. The land that had supported the kingdom for generations was beginning to feel the strain. At the same time, trade was changing. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe had grown rich by controlling the movement of gold and ivory. But merchants began using new routes. Other trading centers started to rise. The kingdom no longer held the same advantage it once had. New leaders were also emerging further to the north. One of these was the kingdom of Mutopa. As power shifted, many people gradually moved away from Great Zimbabwe and settled in new regions. This was not a sudden disaster. There was no single battle that destroyed the city. No great fire. No invading army that reduced it to ruins. Instead, the city slowly grew quieter. Families left to begin new lives elsewhere. Markets became smaller. Homes were abandoned. The voices that had once echoed between the stone walls slowly faded away. By the late 15th century, Great Zimbabwe was no longer the thriving capital it had once been. The kingdom had changed. But its people had not disappeared. The ancestors of the Shona carried their traditions, skills, and culture into new kingdoms that continue to flourish across the region. Great Zimbabwe had come to an end. Its legacy had not. For centuries, nature reclaimed the city. Grass covered the pathways. Trees grew between the stones. The Great Wall stood silently beneath the African sky. Travelers who discovered the ruins could hardly believe what they were seeing. How could such an extraordinary city have existed here? Who had built these magnificent walls? Some visitors looked at the evidence before them. Others looked away. Unable to imagine that an African civilization had created such a masterpiece, they searched for answers elsewhere. They claimed the city had been built by distant peoples, foreign kings, even legendary figures from ancient stories. But the stones told a different story. The pottery, the tools, the homes, the trade goods, and the countless discoveries made by archaeologists all pointed to the same conclusion. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. It always had been. The city had never needed another civilization to explain its greatness. In our final chapter, we discover how archaeology uncovered the truth, why Great Zimbabwe became the symbol of a modern nation, and why its story still matters, not only to Africa, but to the entire world. Chapter 6. Rediscovering Great Zimbabwe. Today, the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe still stand. They have stood through centuries of wind and rain, through changing kingdoms, through changing borders, and through changing ideas about history itself. Visitors from around the world now walk through the same gateways once used by kings, merchants, builders, and families. They climb the hill complex. They stand inside the great enclosure. They pause beside the conical tower. And they wonder how such an extraordinary city came to be. For a long time, the answers were hidden. Not beneath the stones, but beneath old assumptions. When archaeologists carefully studied the ruins, they uncovered evidence that told a clear story. The pottery, the tools, the houses, the trade goods, the stonework. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. Their knowledge, their skill, their vision. Stone by stone, generation after generation. Today, historians know that Great Zimbabwe was one of the greatest cities in medieval Africa. It was a center of government, a place of trade, a home for thousands of people, and a symbol of a civilization that was confident, connected, and creative. Its influence reached far beyond its stone walls. Perhaps its greatest legacy can be found in the name of an entire nation. When the modern country of Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, it chose its name to honor this remarkable city. The famous Zimbabwe bird, first carved by the people of Great Zimbabwe hundreds of years ago, became the nation's symbol. In this way, the past continues to live in the present. Today, Great Zimbabwe is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Archaeologists continue to study its buildings. Historians continue to learn from its past. And visitors continue to be amazed by what they see. Yet there is still much we do not know. What songs echoed through these hills? What stories did parents tell their children? What celebrations filled these stone courtyards? Some questions may never be answered. But perhaps that is part of what makes history so fascinating. Every discovery brings us a little closer to the people who came before us. Great Zimbabwe reminds us that history is not only found in books. It is written in stone, in landscapes, in traditions, and in the lives of ordinary people whose work can outlast centuries. For too long, Great Zimbabwe was known more for the myths surrounding it than for the people who built it. Today, that is changing. Its true story is being told. Not as a legend, but as history. Thank you for joining us on the African Archive as we explore the remarkable story of Great Zimbabwe. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to the African Archive and turn on notifications. Together, we'll continue uncovering the people, kingdoms, civilizations, and mysteries that shaped Africa and helped shape our world. Because the greatest monuments are not simply built to stand the test of time. They are built to remind future generations of what people can achieve when knowledge, determination, and imagination come together. And among those monuments, Great Zimbabwe stands proudly as one of Africa's greatest achievements.